Good day. My name is Dan Duncan, Vice President for Impact Strategies at Community Technology, a company that offers web-based software to funders and nonprofits to help drive their impact and results. The webinar today is going to be based on my experience of more than 30 years as a grant maker, primarily in the United Way world, with a number of United Ways. In addition, I've been engaged in using technology to help drive my impact at my organizations for a number of years, and I'm also a faculty member of the Asset-Based Community Development Institute at Northwestern University. So my work in the discussion today will be based on my experiences and my information and knowledge relative to grant making, technology, and outcomes and results. So I really enjoy having everyone here today for the webinar. If you have any questions, just because of the number of people on the webinar, rather than unmuting your phones, if you have any questions, please type them in the question box, and I will answer them as we go through the webinar today. So with that, let's get started. The objectives of the webinar today is to talk about technology and how it can play a critical role relative to our grant making and our ability to tell our story to our donors. So I'm going to talk about implementing the principles of effective outcome-based grant making. I'm going to talk about how to help your grantees collect data that is relevant to outcome-based reporting. And then I'm going to talk about how to use technology and show you an example based on my work at the United Way of Tucson in Southern Arizona of how we use technology to drive our impact and results. But before we get started, let's take a couple polls just to find out who is on the webinar on the call with us today. So let's first find out, is your organization a community foundation, a health foundation, a United Way, or any other type of organization? And it looks like about 75% of you are represent community foundations and 25% United Ways. Second question, to help us get the word out about these webinars, I wanted to find out, how did you hear about this webinar? Was it from one of our emails from me, from a colleague, or through our social media efforts? And about 88% received it from the email, and about 13% in social media. So that's, again, one of the things we're trying to do is expand our social media work to reach more organizations. So I'm glad to see that a number of you did receive it through the social media effort. So the principles of effective outcomes-based grant making. First of all, assumptions for achieving community impact. Based on my experience and the experience of others, I think there's a couple things that are important to highlight. First, that effective organizations are learning organizations that know how to effectively collect and use data to make the mid-course corrections that are necessary. So we know in today's world we need to become learning organizations and utilize data to make decisions as we move forward. In addition, to achieve community impact or community change or results, it takes a wide variety of strategies and activities to achieve community change, what I call both care and service. Service is what agencies provide, the grant-making side of what we fund in programs and services, but it also takes care. And what we mean by care is when people themselves, neighborhood residents, people involved become involved and share their gifts, as we call it, and become involved as producers of their own and their community's well-being. It takes both care and service. Today we're going to kind of talk more about the service side, but I do have a webinar coming up next week on Tuesday the 13th at 11 o'clock about how to engage care, how to utilize the tools of asset mapping to begin to increase care in a community. And so there will be information at the end of this webinar on how to sign up for that webinar next week. Finally, we need to be able to measure the impact of everything we do at the community strategy and program level. And to do that, it's clear that it requires that we use technology so that we can, in fact, measure the results of what we do. Another way to think about it, Elizabeth Shore, some of you may have heard of her. She's at Harvard University, and she's written a number of books about what works, what makes a significant difference in a community. And she talks about 5 key things. The first one is that we have to be clear about the purposes of our work, the outcomes we're trying to achieve. We need to be willing to be held accountable for achieving those purposes, and we need to create and sustain the partnerships necessary to achieve these purposes. And all of those things, again, as I think you would all agree, require in today's world technology to help us do that effectively. But she also talks about we need to move audaciously into the world beyond programs. And that's where it becomes important that we talk about both care and service, because that's what she's talking about, is if we're really going to achieve results, we need to get people involved, parents involved, neighbors, friends, relatives, all involved in the work that we do. And then finally, we have to have the capacity to take community-wide responsibility to assure that actions that will lead to improved lives will actually happen. And that's where it becomes important that the roles of funders, such as yourselves, play in helping to set that community-wide responsibility. The other way to think about it, there was a wonderful book written by Francis Wesley, Brenda Zimmerman, and Michael Patton called Getting to Maybe, How the World Has Changed. In their book, they talk, and I really would recommend this book if you're interested in finding out about how real change occurs in the real world. And one of the things they talk about is there are three kinds of problems: simple, complicated, and complex. A simple problem is like baking a cake. The recipe is critical, but it's a small number of ingredients, a small recipe. You put that together, you typically end up with a wonderful cake. A complicated problem is something like sending a rocket to the moon, but it is basically still a large recipe. It has a lot more components, but because of physics, everything acts the same. So if you follow the recipe, follow the plan, you are going to get to the moon. The final problem, though, is a complex problem, and that's like raising a child. And unfortunately, in that case, the environment changes, the variables don't always act the same. As we all know, if we raise more than one child, we try to raise them the same, they turn out totally different. And that's why it's important that we need to have timely data and information so we can make the mid-course corrections that are necessary, because in our world of funding human service programs, health and human service programs, we are dealing with complex problems and not complicated problems. So data becomes critical if we're going to make those mid-course corrections. One of the things I like to start with when I do this webinar is talking about the concept that it's really important if we're going to work with grantees, with agencies, and with programs, it's important that we take time to make sure we're using a common language, that everyone agrees to the same definitions, because that's where I see some real confusion when we're trying to do effective outcome-based grant making, is when people aren't agreeing to the same terms. So I think it's important to begin to do that. So I'm just briefly going to go through some of the key terms that I think are helpful that we make sure we agree to. The first one is outcome-based grant making. What is that? And that is something that provides us the information necessary to define program project success. Again, going back to what Elizabeth said, we need to make sure that we are agreeing on the outcomes and results we're trying to achieve. We need to understand the components and process of success. We need to prove our success. We need to make informed decisions, and this allows us to qualify for more and larger grants, donations, to help drive our work. And many funders today have developed what we call community-wide impact statements. I think most funders today understand they can't be all things for all people. They have to move from just meeting agency needs and program needs to addressing community needs, community issues, and to begin to move forward. To do that, we need to have some long-term goals, such as the Annie Casey Foundation, All Children Need and Deserve Lifelong Connections to a Safe, Caring Family. Austin City Connection, here where we're located, promoting community-wide wellness. The United Way Worldwide has developed goals around education, income, and health, so that most funders are becoming focused. But when we do that, we need to be clear that community-wide outcomes and indicators, that data is collected from community-wide data, not agency data. You can't just roll up agency data into community-wide indicators. You need to look for community-wide data from community-wide data sources like the census, like school district data, like the Center for Disease Control. So you look at community-wide data to see how we are driving our results and impact. Individual agencies, the programs and services we fund, should not and cannot be held accountable for changes in the overall community-wide results individually. They contribute, but they're not individually responsible But individual agencies, the programs and services we fund, can and must be held accountable for their results. And that's why this becomes so important as we move forward using technology and outcome-based funding, is to make sure that we are holding agencies accountable. So again, if our goal is to reduce the dropout rate in a school district or in our community, we can't hold individual agencies responsible for driving or changing the dropout rate, but we certainly need to hold them responsible for the kids that they work with in their program. So if an agency says that 80% of their kids will graduate on time, then we need to hold them accountable to make sure that they do achieve that goal of 80% of their kids graduating on time. Outputs are how we measure the magnitude of the activities of a program, service, or strategy. That's how productive agencies are: the number of people served, the number of hours or services provided, and the amount of resources provided. Examples of that would be the number of youth participating in the after-school program, the hours of counseling provided, or the amount of emergency assistance provided during the year. So those are examples of outputs, which again just talk about productivity and don't tell us anything about the impact of the results or the outcomes of what we're trying to achieve. And that's because outcomes are changes in behaviors, attitudes, knowledge, or circumstances for individuals or populations as a direct result of participating in an agency's program or in a strategy. So again, outcomes are changes in behaviors, attitudes, knowledge, or circumstances. Samples of the youth in the program will improve their academic performance, or individuals in the program will maintain employment for 6 months. Indicators are a measure which helps quantify an output or outcome. So indicators are where it becomes measurable. Outcomes are not necessarily measurable by themselves without linking them to an indicator. So indicators are definable, quantifiable, measurable, and collectible. So that's how we can tell whether we have in fact changed behaviors, attitudes, conditions, or knowledge. So for example, sample indicators would be the number of youth in the program, the number of hours of counseling provided, or the number percent of program participants who will remain employed for 6 months. The next key definition are targets. These are the goals set for each program or service's outputs and outcomes. This is where we add the accountability in. So this is where we have set goals as to the number of clients or units of service projected to be served, or the number percent of your clients that will achieve an identified outcome through that indicator. So samples are 1,245 youth will participate in the after-school program. 4,500 hours of counseling will be provided during the school year, or 80% of program participants will remain employed for 6 months. So again, those are the goals that we want to try to achieve with any of the programs or outcomes or programs or services that we fund. The next definition is strategy. And a strategy is a specific activity program or a set of activities or programs that are linked together to achieve a common purpose. To achieve, for example, as we talked earlier, to achieve community-level results, we need to employ a variety of strategies, including programs and services, community resident action, care, advocacy, media, public policy, etc. And we need to have the ability to track and collect data at the strategy and at the program level. So sample strategies, for example, if our issue is early education and we want to make sure that more kids come to school ready to learn, and the indicator around that may be third grade reading scores, for example, increasing third grade reading scores, or the number of children that can read at third grade as the indicator. To do that takes a variety of strategies, including improving the quality of early care and educational experiences, promoting early literacy, neighborhood book drives, supporting parent and teacher education, improving nutrition and oral health for kids, enhancing community awareness, doing public policy to secure additional funding for early education, or make it easier for young children to be in early education. So again, as we begin to look at what is it going to take to move the indicator around those community-wide issues, it takes a wide variety of strategies. And this is how we need to begin to think about our work, I believe, of putting strategies together and being able to measure the impact and the results of those strategies as we move forward. So let me stop there and see if there are any questions or comments. Again, please type them in the question box on the GoToMeeting window if you do have any questions, and I will be glad to answer them. And again, as you go through, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in, and remind everyone I will be sending you this PowerPoint at the conclusion of the webinar. So to help our agencies, the grantees, the organizations we fund, to do effective outcomes-based reporting, I think it's important to answer 3 questions. The first one is, how productive are we? Again, how many people are we serving? How many units of service? Is the agency going to serve 10 youth or 100 youth? Are they going to provide 1 hour of counseling or 10 hours of counseling as you move forward? So it's important to be able to see that so that we can identify how productive an individual agency or an organization is. The second question we want to ask is, are we doing things right? Are we following our protocols? Are we having good client satisfaction? Are clients staying in the program long enough because we have good client retention? Those are all key answers to the issue of, are we doing things right? But that doesn't tell us whether we're doing the right things, because we know from evidence-based work that there are some strategies, some activities that have better chance of results than others. One of the examples of that is when I was with the United Way in Tucson in southern Arizona. We were working on early education, and one of the agencies had an idea. They wanted to provide bookmarks to youth in the neighborhoods that they were working in, and they had a great job, and they did a great job getting bookmarks in all the families, or into all the families in the neighborhood that had small children. So they were doing it right. They had a great strategy for getting the bookmarks out, but they weren't doing the right thing, because there's no information or no research that indicates that giving kids bookmarks helps increase reading. What the kids needed were books, not bookmarks, and helping the parents learn how to read to their kids. So as you begin to see, there is a difference between, are we doing things right and are we doing the right things? The other way to think about it is this quadrant here, adapted from Mark Friedman's work and some other work that really looks at quantity, quality, effect, and effort. So up in the upper left-hand corner is the issue of how productive are we, which again looks at the number of clients served, the number of activities that are provided. So that tells us about quantity and effort. And so it's important to have some data measures to see how effective we're being in that arena. The second one is quality. Are we doing things right? In this case, we're looking at client satisfaction, retention data, and are we in fact following our protocols? Just to take a second on retention data, I think, and effort and quality, I think retention data is critical, because we could have the best program in the world, and this is particularly important in youth development programs, because we could have great strategies, great curriculum, have a wonderful program, but if the kids don't stay in the program long enough, they're not going to get any of the benefit. So that's why it becomes so important to measure that. We know mentoring makes a huge impact on whether youth stay in school, whether they succeed. But if they only come and see their mentor once or twice or for a month and then drop out, there's going to be no impact from that program. So retention data becomes critical, and for agencies to look at client satisfaction and look at retention together, so they make sure that people, the youth, the clients, the people they serve, are staying in the program long enough to get the benefit of that program. And then finally, are we doing the right things? Are we in fact having impact? Are we having an effect at both the quantity and the quality level? So that's where we begin to measure the skills, the knowledge, the attitudes and opinion, the behavior and circumstance changes that have occurred because of the services that we are funding or we are delivering. So it's important to look at that both as the number of people served and then the percent of people served. So are 80% of the clients getting better, learning new skills, new knowledge or circumstances, or are 20%? Because if we have a program that's getting a high percentage, that may tell us that we need to invest more money in it, because we do have the opportunity to take it to scale and serve more people effectively. We also, in the percent side, though, need to look at the client population we're serving, because in some cases a 20% success rate would be very good. In others, an 80% success rate is very good. So it's important to begin to look at that in the context of who agencies are serving and what is a good success rate for that effort as we move forward. So as you begin to think about this, in my work, one of the things that I did was I developed kind of this schematic to help agencies that I funded begin to go down the road of effective outcome-based reporting. We know some agencies really understand it very quickly. innately that they need to have good data so they can become a learning organization and make the mid-course corrections that are necessary. For other agencies, we need to begin to help them as funders. And so I developed kind of this schematic to help them become effective outcome-based reporting organizations. The first thing an agency should start with is their organization's mission. As they begin to look at their work and begin to respond to funders' requests, RFPs, or requests for funding, they need to make sure that they are focused on their mission, their work that they've done, the work that their board has approved them to do, because we don't want agencies to get into what we call mission creep, where they're just chasing money and taking them outside of their mission or their key effective strategies that they know how to do, their expertise. So I ask agencies to start, what is your mission? Does what we're doing fit in that? Because the second question is then, relative to their funders' community-wide impact statement, what role can their agency play? Is there an alignment to their mission and alignment to their expertise around what the funder is trying to provide? Do those two align correctly? The third part then is, are there other potential donors or funders that would help support this same effort? Because as a funder, one of the things that I wanted to make sure we were never doing, as I called it, one of the principles was, I never wanted to fund anything that I could kill. And what I meant by that is I never wanted to fund anything where I was the sole funder of that effort. So one of the things to ask agencies, as you begin to apply for funding with our organization, are there other donors that would be interested in supporting that you have connections with, so that we can develop a broader program with broader support than just one funding source to begin to do it? And then finally, the last question is, now let's begin to look at the components of their program or their strategies that they believe make their work unique and successful. I think one of the best ways to start with agencies is really asking them, what are those parts of your program that you think are unique, that make you sort of better or different than the agency down the street? I don't mean that necessarily to be competitive, but what makes your program unique or you think better, and what are those things that you are really proud of as an agency, as part of your strategies and what you try to do in the community? Because if you ask them to begin to collect their data around those things they're most proud of and the unique components of their program, I find that's a better way to get agencies to become involved and get engaged in outcome-based reporting. Just to give you a quick example, I was working with an agency when I was with the United Way in central Indiana, in Indianapolis, and they were an infant child care center. So they were providing infant child care. So as I sat down with them, went through these components, I said, so what are those things that make you unique? Because they said, well, we're an infant child care center. What could we possibly be collecting in outcomes, whether the kids turned over in 3 months or 4 months in their crib, because basically that's what's going on. And I said, well, no, what are those unique pieces of your program that you're very proud of? And they said, well, one of the things we do is we test all the kids with in the program with the Denver test of early developmental disabilities. So we can see if we can identify if they're going to have any early early developmental delay issues. And if we find that it appears they may have some problems, we refer them to get further testing and connect with a professional. I said, great, that's a unique part of your program. Do you track how many of the families that you do the test for and you recommend that they get further testing and connect with a professional? Do you track how many of those families actually follow up and do that additional testing? And they said, no, we don't do that. And I said, well, I would suggest you might want to. That's a great way to start, because you want to find out whether you're doing that effectively. You want to find out whether, when you do the test and you tell the family they need to go get further testing, do 80% of the families follow up or do 20% follow up? That's important to know, because if 80% or more are following up, that tells you you're probably doing it right. So you want to make sure you codify your protocols so that when new staff are hired, they'll do it the same way, so that you can continue to have that good success, and you can continue to fine-tune it to see if you can even increase that success. If you find out that only about 18 or 20% of your families follow up, that tells you that you're probably not doing it as effectively as you can, or you haven't recognized all the barriers that get in the way of families following up for additional testing. So you probably want to change your protocol and try new activities to see if you can increase that number, the number of families that actually follow up. So that's an example of working with an agency to identify their key uniquenesses so they can begin to collect information that is necessary to become a learning organization so they can make the mid-course corrections that are necessary to do a better job. So let me stop again and see if you have any other questions or comments. Again, please type the questions in the question box if you have any questions as we move forward. And while you're thinking about the questions, just one final poll, just to find out how many of your organizations, if you already are using technology to help drive these results. So if you would, please go ahead and vote. And it's just about 50-50, using technology and not. So that just gives us some sense as we move forward in the process of the webinar. So the power of technology. Let's talk a little bit about technology now, because to make the necessary mid-course corrections, you need timely information from your funded agencies and partners. And technology can facilitate the collection of that information. It can facilitate and streamline your grant-making processes, the application, proposal review, decision-making, and reporting. Because one of the things we know is that if you're spending more and more time trying to collate information, put together the Excel spreadsheets and all of those things, that's really taking time away from the more important work, which is focusing on creating learning communities and developing a wide variety of strategies around both care and service. Technology can also enhance your communication between your agencies and partners, and when you have good information, it can really help you facilitate telling your story to your donors and potentially other funders. So with technologies, agencies can submit their information when you need it, whether that's monthly, quarterly, or semi-annually. When I started as a funder years ago with United Way, again, we got information, just that year-end report, because we got them all on paper. We couldn't do much with them, and so it really didn't help us do much. So we basically got the report, looked at it quickly, and put it in the file drawer. And so that's why agencies didn't see their information being used, and so they weren't very excited about taking the time to provide that information. When you collect the information using technology, you can roll the data up at the strategy level. You can find the 5 programs that are working on a particular program and roll those together as a strategy and see the kind of results you're having both individually as well as collectively at the strategy level. And I'll show you some examples of that in a few minutes. And finally, agencies have additional real-time information that they can use to improve their programs. So the use of technology can really help us do that as we move forward. Before I show you an example of that, I also want to talk a few more concepts about data and information. First of all, the data that you collect, you want to make sure that it has high communication power. Will funders, donors, volunteers understand the data and understand what we're trying to do? Because if something doesn't have a high communication power, it's hard for people to really understand it. That's why relative to youth development, graduation rates are so critical, because that has huge communication power. People understand graduation rates, whether a child graduates from high school or not. If we talk about how they did on the XYZ test, that doesn't have as great a communication power, because people don't know whether a 200 is a good score or a bad score, because they don't know the scale. They don't understand the test. So that's why it's important to look for data that has strong communication power. People will understand. Common donors and others will understand what you mean by this indicator or the data that you're collecting. The second piece of it, does it relate to the community-wide impact strategy? Will people automatically understand the connection between that indicator and the community-wide impact strategy that you're trying to achieve? Is there a strong connection there? The other reason it's important that we look for the data with strong communication power is you do not need to report everything. Data travels in herds. So that as you begin to look at data, you don't have to collect everything, because most data, if you're collecting things, probably they're all tracking the same way. So what you need to look for is the data that is the lead horse, if you will. That data that has the strongest communication power and the strongest connection to the community-wide impact strategy. You don't have to collect it all. And finally, Is it easily collectible and replicable? Can you find it easily? Is it not expensive to do? That's why, again, at the community-wide level, looking at census data and those kinds of things is so helpful, because it is easy, collectible, and replicable. That's why the Census Bureau started the American Community Survey, because they knew that 10-year data points were not good enough in today's real world. So that's why they started the American Community Survey, so that they had information available in between the 10-year census to move forward. So what I'd like to do now is give you an example of, based on the work that I was doing in Tucson at the United Way of Tucson in southern Arizona, you putting all of this to work to help drive technology, utilizing technology to drive impacts and results. So again, understanding that we need to collect data at the community level data, strategy level data, and at the program level. So again, this is a sample from an after-school program that we were working on. So our community-wide impact strategy around education was helping children and youth achieve their potential. That was our community-wide outcome. And our indicator was high school graduation rates. So we were tracking high school graduation rates in Pima County. Our strategy program outputs were around the number of youth served and the units of service provided. So we needed to know that for each of the programs that we funded, so we could see what kind of impact we were having relative to the number of youth involved in the community. Our strategy program level outcome was youth developing skills, competencies in an out-of-school time program that prepared them for college, work, and life. And the strategy program indicator was results from a pre- and post-test. We got all the agencies that we funded to do after-school programming to all agree to the same pre- and post-test to track their results. So all the kids that entered the after-school program were given a test as soon as they entered, and at the end of each quarter they were administered the test again to see if they had in fact learned new skills. So our strategy targets for this was, in the programs we funded, in this example, was for 4,428 youth to be served in the after-school program, for 10,000 units of service, which were after-school days to be provided, and for 60% of the youth participants to score higher on their post-skills test. So that set the stage for our work using technology. So it started with the community-wide data. So using technology, we entered into the system. And again, we in Tucson used the CTK's database. So this is just using our system to show you this work. But again, for those that already have technology, I'm sure you can do the same thing. So here is the community-wide data tracking graduation rates over time. So we could see by employing all of the strategies whether we were in fact making a difference, reminding you that just the activity of after-school program was not the only strategy or program or activity we were doing to drive the graduation rates. This included working with schools, working with early education, working with mentors. A whole host of strategies were being employed. I'm just focusing now in this example on one of our strategies, which was the after-school program. So again, the after-school data, or the graduation data was collected from the school district. At the strategy program level, which is collected from the agencies and partners, here's a sample of a quarterly report form. We decided we needed, because we wanted real-time data to make the mid-course corrections, we wanted the agencies to submit this easy-to-complete quarterly report every quarter. So this sample, again, the agency is Brighter Tomorrows. This is the program information for that agency. And then here are the outputs. How productive were the agencies? In the after-school program, this agency, Brighter Tomorrows, they projected that they would serve 3,000 kids during the year. So that was their target. And here's their results for the fourth quarter. They served 589 youth this quarter for a total for the year of 2,595. And they get units of service, 4,500 after school days, and this quarter they did 947 for a total for the year of 4,619. At the outcome level, youth developing skills, competencies in an out-of-school time program that prepared them for college, work, and life. The indicator or measure, again, as I highlighted, was the pre- and post-test. So this agency said of the 3,000 kids that we're serving, we expect 1,000 of them. Our target is for 1,000 to do better on their post-test during one of the quarters. And this quarter, 185 youth did better on the post-test, for a total for the year of 967 that did better. So now let's move. So that was the report that each of the agencies submitted each quarter relative to that result. And their after-school program. So now we need to utilize reporting to begin to tell that story. So here are samples of reports that help us make the mid-course corrections and give us the information we need to drive our impact and our outcomes-based funding. So here is the after-school report relative to the outputs, the number of people served, the number of youth served, and the number of units of service. Again, at times you can show this information graphically as well as in tabular form to tell your story. So here are Brighter Tomorrows, that agency. Here's the first, second, third, and fourth quarter report and how many youth they served in their program each quarter and the number of units of service. So you can begin to see whether they're on target or not. For example, if your agency is supposed to, or if it's you're supposed to serve 1,000 kids or 3,000 kids, you ought to be doing about 25% each quarter, unless it's a special summer program. So we were able to look and see that this agency, Brighter Tomorrows, was really underserving the first 2 quarters. So we could talk to them to find out, are you planning a special outreach in the fall, or what are you trying to do to get your numbers up? And they were able to make sure that, as you can see, the third quarter, their numbers did exceed or did grow, so they were able to get back on target to serve the number of people, the number of youth they were supposed to serve during the year. So again, using technology, we can get real-time information to see whether agencies are productive or not. Are they providing the units of service? Are they providing the number of people that they said they would serve during the year? Again, looking at year end, you could look to see how they all did if you wanted to track that at the strategy level to make sure that everyone is serving and both the number of youth that they said they would serve as well as the units of service. Also, you may want to collect demographic data from your agency relative to make sure they're serving the right kids, whether that's ethnicity or race, whether that's gender, whether that's income, or whether that's location. You may want to have your grantees collect that information. And as you can see here, you can very easily then highlight how many, the ethnic breakdown, for example, here, both at the individual agency level as well as collectively, how did at the strategy level, how were they doing relative to tracking your outcomes and results? And now we look at, again, how did they do relative to the goal of the number of youth to be served? Again, our accountability, our goal was to serve 4,428 youth in the program, and collectively they actually exceeded that goal and served 4,738. So you can see you have the ability to now dashboard this information and give you key level information to understand whether you have in fact exceeded the goal both at the individual agency level as well as at the strategy level. And here you have a dashboard that you can go back to your donors, to the community, and say thank you for your support. We were able to exceed the number of youth in our programming last year in the after-school program, and more youth were in quality after-school programs last year thanks to your support, for example. Now we're moving on to the outcome achievement by quarter. Again, we're tracking number of youth served by quarter. Now we were also tracking the number of youth that did better on their post-test by quarter. So you can see, again, Brighter Tomorrow each quarter, how they did, the percentage of their kids that actually did better on their post-test. So you can begin to track that information. So if you see an agency that's not getting very good results, you can connect with them to see what you could do to help improve their results. So for example, here at year end, we have information relative to how each agency did based on their goals, their accountability. So Brighter Tomorrows, remember, 1,000 of their youth, they projected that 1,000 youth would do better on their post-test, and actually 967 did better. So they were down 3%. So that's probably within the margin of error. But Leaders of Tomorrow were down 18%. So as we get that information, we can begin to utilize that information to meet with the agency to see what we could do to help them increase their results or their ability to be successful. One of the things we would do is connect them with these other 3 agencies that, as you can see, were actually successful in achieving their outcomes. So maybe we could link Leaders of Tomorrow together with Sunrise Youth Services to see if they could learn some things so that Leaders of Tomorrow could increase their results during the year. And again, it's better if you have real-time information at the quarterly basis, so you can in fact make the mid-course corrections that are necessary to drive your results and improve your results. And then you have the ability to blackboard or dashboard the information so that you can tell your story. In this case, collectively, the goal, as you remember, was for 2,670 youth to do better on their post-tests, and during the year, 2,693 actually did better. So you have that ability to at the strategy level, dashboard that so you can go to your community, go to your donors, go to your board and highlight that we were able to exceed our goal relative to the number of youth that learn new skills in their after-school program during the year. So again, you can dashboard the productivity, the outputs, the number of youth served, and dashboard the actual results. Did the youth in the program actually learn new skills that will help them graduate from school, graduate and stay in school? So let me stop here again and see if there are any questions or comments about what we've talked about today. We've got about 15 minutes left, so I'd be glad to answer any questions that anyone may have. So please, again, type your questions in the question box if you have any. Or we can try taking your phone off of mute. So if you do have a question you would like to ask, if you're using the phone or you have a microphone connected to your computer, please just click the little hand sign, which allows you to raise your hand so that you can ask a question. So again, please either type in the question in the question box or raise your hand by clicking the little hand signal to raise your hand. Okay, it appears there are no questions. So what I'd like to do is a couple things. First of all, as I'd mentioned, I'm doing a webinar next Tuesday on asset mapping versus needs assessment, strategies for greater impact. So I'm going to talk about, as a funder, how to increase care in your community by using the principles of asset-based community development so that you can support both care and service in your community. So if you're interested, please sign up for the webinar next week. Again, when you get this PowerPoint, you'll have the link to sign up for next week's webinar. The other thing I would like to do, and I do have a question, so let me stop here for a second. Okay, we have a question. We are funding environmental sustainability in our community. How would one measure the impact in this case? Well, I think there's two things relative to that of measuring the impact. First of all is how many, in environmental sustainability, I would assume a large portion of that has to do with the number of people that are actually engaged in that activity and are doing things. So one of the things you want to measure is how many people are engaged in that activity. That's an output. But you do want to measure that so the agencies, the programs you fund, they can report how many people are involved in that activity. The second part of that is environmental sustainability is I assume you want people to do something to help increase environmental sustainability. Again, you want them to change their attitudes, their knowledge, their circumstances relative to environmental sustainability, either at the agency level, the program level, or the individual level. So what you need to do is look at how would we know that they're doing those things? How would we know? What are those indicators that we could use? And so you may want to brainstorm within your organization or within the grantees that you fund to talk about how are you going to know when you've changed attitudes, knowledge, circumstances, or behavior relative to environmental sustainability. So that would be just a couple thoughts. I'm glad to talk about this a little more offline as well if you have any questions about that. So again, if there are any other questions, please type them in. If not, what I'd like to offer before we sign off is two things. One, when you do sign off, please, you will receive a questionnaire that talks about, gives you a chance to rate this webinar and give me suggestions for new topics or how we could do things later or different. So please take the time to fill out that questionnaire, because that really does help us do more effective webinars as we move forward. In addition, if any of you would like to stay online, I would be glad to do a demonstration of CTK's online technology. Again, this webinar was about kind of how to use technology, but if any of you are interested in staying online and seeing a short demonstration of CTK's web-based technology to drive impact and results, please indicate so in the question box by just typing in that you would like to see a demo. So if anybody is interested, please do that. So I have one so far, so that's great, Judith. And okay, somebody else? Great, so we have a number of individuals that would like to stay on and see the demo. So what I'd like to do is I will go ahead and officially end the webinar now. So thank you all for attending the educational webinar. And again, you will receive a copy of the PowerPoints this afternoon. And now I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar and log into our website and actually show you our technology.